would try something a bit different and take you along with me on my trip to London. I was here for 4 days, but I spent the first few days visiting friends. I arrived on a Friday and had a little appy night with friends and then did the Bermondsey Beer Mile the next day. The Sunday was a bit more chill and we just went to a pub for lunch. And then I went on a little solo walk as the friend I was staying with had a bit too much fun the night before. I was there during the Jubilee celebration, so I walked past some of the leftover party decorations. I also walked to Clapham Junction from Brixton and then to Balham, where I lived most of the time I lived here. In this apartment here, it wasn't very nice, but it was a good location. It was a nice little trip down memory lane. So I lived in London for about 2 years, so I have a pretty good view of the city both as a tourist and as someone who lived there. While living in London, I had quite a few friends and family visits, and I would always take them on a tour that was quite similar to where I'll be going in this video, with some changes as there was a tube strike the day I filmed this. Because of the tube strike, I'm taking the bus from Brixton, where my friend lives, to central London, which takes about 50 minutes. The tube would usually be a lot faster, but it's just not possible today. That being said, you do get to see a lot more of the city above ground on a bus than you do underground on a tube. Also, if you plan on taking transit or anything, remember that it's very busy during rush hour, so leaving between 8 or 9 a.m. or 5 to 7 p.m. will be a nightmare. So I got off the bus at Waterloo Station and walked down towards the river and towards the London Eye. I did go up on the London Eye when I first visited here, and before I even moved to London. It was cool, but it was a bit overpriced. I haven't done it since, and I won't be doing it today. This area is South Bank and there's usually a lot going on. It can be an interesting walk if you come here on a weekend when there's events and the market, but today it was really cold and windy there and there wasn't too much going on, so I headed off towards Big Ben and the Parliament buildings. What surprised me when I first visited here was how close all the main tourist attractions are. You can see Big Ben, Westminster Abbey, Buckingham Palace, Trafalgar Square, Downing Street, and all those places in a very short time if you're walking. So I walked through that area towards Buckingham Palace, which I learned was closed off for the day as it was the Queen's Jubilee celebration over the weekend. They were taking down all the seating, fencing, and the other equipment. Instead, I took a little walk through St. James Park and headed back towards the river. I also tried to stop at Trafalgar Square, but it was also blocked off with all the event takedown. So instead, I continued walking along the river. There were some areas that were blocked off from construction, so I couldn't follow it exactly, but I walked opposite the South Bank to where the London Eye is and walked towards Tower Bridge. I also walked past the Shard and London Bridge Station. I was forced to cross the river again due to construction and decided that it was a good time to get a sandwich at Pret, and I used that time to look at how I was going to get to my next destination. From there, I walked a bit further and crossed the river again towards Tower Bridge. Despite what Fergie thinks, this is not London Bridge. London Bridge is way less impressive. When you cross Tower Bridge, you also walk by the Tower of London, which is super cool and worth a visit if you have the time and money, as it is a bit expensive. My next stop was the DLR station, as DLR trains weren't affected by the tube strike. The DLR is a bit different from the tube, as there are no drivers on the trains. You also have to tap in here, as there are no gates, so don't forget to do that because they might check you on the train, especially during off hours. I did get checked later on this journey too. The DLR is also nice because it's above ground and you can see a bit more of the city, though it's generally not as quick as the tube and it goes a lot less places. So I am on my way to Greenwich. To get there, there are 2 stations you can get off at. I would recommend getting off at Greenwich Cuddy Sark, as it takes you directly to the High Street and to all the other sites in the area. Though I got off at Greenwich Station and wanted to walk to where I used to live. This is the first place I stayed when I moved here. There's so much to see in Greenwich, and if you have a few days in London, I would definitely recommend checking it out. Next, I walked to the High Street, where you'll find a lot of shops and restaurants. Greenwich Market is also cool if you're here on the weekend. There's lots of good pubs in the area. Gypsy Moth was our hangout when we lived here. Once you get to the end of the road, there's the Cuddy Sark, which is a boat made into a museum. I've never gone into this museum as it's one of the London museums which you have to pay for. There's also a foot tunnel here that takes you to the other side of the Thames. I've done it once and I'm not going to do it today, but it's cool if you have the time, though it doesn't really lead to anywhere super interesting. If you walk further around the corner, there's also a pub through here, and it's where I'm going to stop for lunch, which is kind of a second lunch as I already had a sandwich, but that was more of a breakfast because I didn't eat any. A giant Peroni is also a must. I then walked through the Maritime College and past the Painted Chapel, which I would recommend visiting if you haven't been, though check the opening time as it's often closed. There's also the Maritime Museum and the Queen's House, which are both free to visit. My next stop was Greenwich Park, which is a super nice park and one of my favorites in London. There's 2 hills in the park, and I'd suggest going up the One Side Tree Hill, which is to the left when you enter through the main entrance. On the One Tree Hill side, you get an unobstructed view of London without the crowds. The other side is also worth a visit. This is where the Royal Museum and the Greenwich Meridian line is. The actual date line runs through this park and this hill, and if you visit at night, there's even a green laser in the sky marking the timeline. This museum does cost money, but you can go see the timeline where the line runs outside the museum for free. Next, I walked back down the hill and went to the river to take the Thames Clipper back to central London. There are 2 boats you can take from here. One is a guided tour and the other one is run by Transport for London and is much cheaper. And that's the one I'll be taking. You can use your Oyster card to get on the boat, but mine was low on funds, so I bought a ticket from the machine here. There's no guide on this boat, but it's a fun way to see the city, and you can even buy a drink on board. I took the boat all the way back to Waterloo, but going to Embarkment would also take you pretty central. Because there was a tube strike and I'd already hit 25,000 steps today, I decided to head back and get the bus to Brixton. I did consider stopping at the Tate Modern, which is one of my favorite art galleries, but the tube strike made it hard to get to, plus my feet were super sore at this point. So that concludes my little tourist day in London. I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the city with me. Ideally, this would be 2-day trips, especially if you haven't been there before, but I think it's a pretty good quick tour around London, seeing some of the major sites and some which aren't as well known. Honestly, it would take years to see all the sites in London. I lived here for a couple of years and taken a few trips back since, and there are still things I haven't seen. But I hope you enjoyed coming on a little day trip to London with me, and let me know if you have any questions about anything and I will do my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye.